All right, finally moving on from the incredibly stacked AFC West to a division a little bit closer to average, which is pretty well defined by the team we're about to talk about, the Indianapolis Colts. Last year, 9-8, they were okay. They went through the Carson Wentz experience that went about as well for them as it has for everybody else recently. But they went through a lot of changes this offseason. All these guys on offense, especially, have played a lot of snaps, not just last year, but the last few years. Jack Doyle, Mark Lewinsky, long-term starters. And I'm not going to go through all of them individually because we're more looking forward. But the point is, this team is making a lot of changes on both sides of the ball, as given by these big lists here. Bringing in, too, the talent, we'll get to it. I do like Dennis Kelly. Stephon Gilmore obviously has been one of the better corners in the NFL for a long time, but these are fairly short lists, especially compared to what's going out. This is the draft class as well, no first-round pick still. And I don't really talk about rookies on this channel until they actually play. Everybody's just wrong about how good or bad they're going to be, so, whatever. But this is another team that we will at least have to mention Alec Pierce specifically, because right now he's slated to be a starter as a rookie receiver. So this is the offense. And I think we'll just start with the strength of this team still. Which has been kind of notorious with them for the last couple of years, which is their offensive line. Obviously, they are still incredibly solid at this point in the field. Quentin Nelson, one of the best, probably the best guard in football. Now Brandon Brooks is retired. Ryan Kelly has been a good player for a long time. Braden Smith, one of the more underrated tackles in football. But some things with this offensive line is that they are not on the complete upper tier, number one high end in the NFL. They haven't been for a little bit. And frankly, while I think these guys are all really good, as a unit, they are not quite as good as I think the reputation suggests. Quentin Nelson, he is incredible. And while he is still good for one or two kind of aggressive, fall flat on his face plays a game, he makes more than up for it. And he's also an incredible pass protector. So, whatever. You have what you believe in there. Ryan Kelly, I'm really high on too. He's been good for a long time. Really good pass protecting center. Braden Smith, like I mentioned before, the dude moves in the run game. He's really good. Their other two spots though are interesting. Now they're moving on finally, like I mentioned before, from Mark Lewinsky to Danny Pencer, a guy they drafted a couple years ago. Mark Lewinsky was the weak point in this offensive line for a long time. While he wasn't bad, he was clearly worse than the rest of the guys playing around him, and it did cause some issues at certain points. And this is a spot I do think they probably did upgrade. Danny Pencer has been pretty good in a fairly small amount of snaps throughout his career. Got to play more last year, even started some games, and he's decent. He provides a lot of what I think the Colts are looking for as far as movement skills and mobility, not just at the line of scrimmage, but on the second level, which does help a lot. Their tackle spot, I'm less encouraged about. Matt Pryor has been starting games for a couple years around the Packers and now here. And listen, he is liked by some people, and I get that, but he's just not that good. He will move in the run game. He can get into double teams real well and move people off the line of scrimmage, but that's about all he offers. He is not very good once he gets to the second level, and as a pass protector, he's clearly the weak point of this offensive line as far as guys who are high-end speed rushers. They can make him kind of look like a traffic cone at times, which is scary. Now, they do have Dennis Kelly as a backup. Dennis Kelly should be the starter on this team. Dennis Kelly's really good, and I'd be surprised if he's not starting by week, 1 really, but by week, 10 by the time they're going into the playoffs. So they do have a backup there. So this offensive line is still good, especially in the run game, which is what this team will still lean on. This team, obviously, super dependent on not just Jonathan Taylor, but the run game in general. They do kind of a decent job of rotating in and out running backs. And Jonathan Taylor is a player that I did kind of talk shit about going into last year. And I still more or less feel the same way. He's good, for sure, but I think he's in a really positive environment, and a lot of running backs would produce in really similar ways to him. Now, that's not to put him down, because obviously he did produce like that last year, and given a lot of carries and a good offense, he's going to put up really big numbers, which is as much as you can really ask for from a running back. They also have Nyheim Hines as a backup, a guy who I like a lot. They use really smart. The reason I'm talking about running back so much more in this video, though, compared to other teams, is just how much the Colts lean on the running game. They're kind of falling behind as far as modern offenses go. Frank Reich has, in certain ways, as far as depending on that first and then kind of getting the pass game out of the way second. And while that can work against certain teams, as I'm going to kind of talk about as we get through this offense as a whole, that can create issues at the high end of modern football. And that's something I do think this team is going to struggle with. So the reason that is when you're this focused on the run game, and when your passing game is just kind of average to above average as far as like schematically, right? As far as creating easy opportunities for the quarterback and for the receivers, not forcing the wind all the time in really tough positions or against greater odds than is necessary. They're fine with it, but they're not really that good. And you combine that with the talent, air quotes, that is here at receiver, and you're going to run into some issues. So what do we have at wide receiver, right? Michael Pittman, we'll start with. Michael Pittman he's okay. He reminds me a lot of Corey Davis, actually, in that he is absolutely solid. He absolutely belongs as a starter in an NFL team. He has really, really, really good hands. He will get open when he's supposed to be open, and he does positive things for your offense. He, however, similar to Corey Davis as well, does not consistently get open, especially when it's not scheme for him. He isn't dusting corners, and while he is like fine after the catch, he is absolutely nothing special, and he's kind of slow, to be honest with you. So when that's your number one receiver, you run into a lot of issues, much like the Titans did in the beginning of Corey Davis' career, as far as actually creating explosive plays. And that means you have to lean on other guys, and this Colts receiver core is just missing that, right? Alec Pierce is that rookie, and, who knows? Rookie receivers are better than ever at this point, so maybe he is really good. But I'm absolutely not going to put stock into that until I see it. And without him, you're talking about a bunch of Ashton Doolin is really kind of the definition of just a guy as far as someone who runs out there and sits in routes the most average way you can imagine. He's not bad, but he's nothing special. Paris Campbell I do like as far as a player who can take the ball and make something happen with it. And I do think he has shown, and again, very small sample size with the injuries in his career, the ability to get open, at least in a marginal way. It's nothing you're really writing home about. And then Kiki Kuti is just a whatever, 1 in a million slot receiver, 1 in a million, 1 of a million. More like, so, and tight end's kind of the same story. Mo Alley Cox is a nice big guy, but that's about all he does. He's fine after the catch. He doesn't really add value to an offense, though. And Kylan Granson, well, I think he has a chance to, is still a second-year tight end who's just okay. He does have the athleticism. I do think there's something there with him to be a good player, but he's not Jack Doyle. He's not these tight ends that they're probably more used to. So, as a whole, this offensive skill group is really just not very good compared to the rest of the NFL, and that brings us to Matt Ryan. So, Matt Ryan, the quarterback, this is the most important part. I kind of buried the lead here. This is what really determines if offense is good. And something that I do need to be positive about with this team, because I don't want to make it sound like I just hate this team or anything like that, is that you are talking about Matt Ryan, who is a good quarterback behind a good offensive line, throwing in a more or less good offense. That will lead to positive results more often than not. Matt Ryan, however, does have flaws, and he is not somebody who really rips teams apart in a clean pocket the way that like a Tom Brady does or something like that. What do I mean by that? It's more he takes advantages of the easy opportunities in an offense for sure. He does it very consistently, and that's awesome. He, however, doesn't necessarily do that as you progress the ball down the field. He really is the definition of a statue. People throw that label around. I think most quarterbacks in the NFL at this point are pretty mobile and can avoid things when they need to. Matt Ryan is not one of them. He can slide in the pocket, okay, but he will run into issues with that. And at times he does still depend on his receivers and or offensive scheme to win for him. And I just don't think that's here. So while, like I said, they do have overall positive things, I think this is a team that offensively kind of just beats bad defenses. Because when you got to ask yourself, against good defenses, how do they win? And basically they have to just run teams over on the offensive line, and I really don't think that's going to happen very frequently with this group, to be honest with you. Which means that they're going to lean a lot more on the defense. So this defense, the first thing we have to talk about is the change at defensive coordinator. This team has had Matt Eberflus for a couple years now, and he did a absolutely fantastic job. He took sometimes marginal, not below average, but whatever talent, and turned it into a really, really, really high end unit multiple years in a row here. There are players that I like, absolutely, that I'm going to highlight, but I just want to point out that going from him to Gus Bradley, someone who has had good defense before as well, but who depended on having high-end talent to do so, I would guess is going to create a ton of issues. So let's talk about the defensive front and the run game first. Right, this team has been dominant in that aspect for a long time. They are still just about as good as you're going to find up through the interior. DeForest Buckner, I have issues with too. We're going to talk about once we get to the pass game. But as a run defender, the dude is absolutely incredible. Top 2-3 in the NFL with Aaron Donald there. He's amazing. Grover Stewart as well is one of the absolute best nose tackles in the NFL. Not just a big fat guy. He actually gets in the line of scrimmage. He moves offensive linemen. He disrupts plays. Grover Stewart's awesome. You do lose depth there, though, which is something this team isn't used to. This team has had a lot of defensive front depth for a while, and now, Eric Johnson's a rookie. RJ McIntosh was a whatever lineman on the Giants. And while I like Byron Coward, and actually I wouldn't be surprised if he plays a lot for this team because I think he's good, he's nothing special. And on the edges, this is where I think this team is going to feel the pain here. Because in the modern NFL, right, how do you control a run game? It's through controlling the edges. And this team is going from Al-Qadim Muhammad and like Isaac Rochelle, Justin Houston. I'm missing some guys too. Just super high-end elite run defenders to pretty meh. Yannick Ngakoue is good as a backside guy who can run down plays. He's really fast, but that's about it. Kwity Paye as a rookie is okay, but again, that's about it. And the rest of these depth pieces, I like Taquan Lewis a little bit as a run defending edge, but they just really don't offer that high end that this team is used to, which puts a lot on their linebackers. Now, normally these linebackers actually could handle it. Darius Leonard, absolutely incredible, or I think it goes by Shaquille Leonard now. That dude gets after it, obviously. I don't need to talk too much about why he's so good, and people know that. I do want to talk about Bobby Yokuriki, though, because he goes kind of under talked about playing next to Leonard. Bobby Okeriki's amazing as well. He's a really, really high-end middle linebacker, doesn't make mistakes, has mobility, has sideline-to-sideline range. While he's not the super high-end playmaker that the really, really good elite middle linebackers are, whatever, he still functions really, really well in this defense. Problem is, Darius Leonard is hurt right now, and he might be hurt into the season, and without him, you really lose a necessary playmaker for this defense. They will have Zaire Franklin step in, who I do like as well. He was injured himself last year, but when he's been on the field, I actually think he's a good player. But he's not obviously the high end that Leonard is. You do have Kenny Moore in the slot as far as a defender, run defender who's like A+, amazing. But the point is, as a whole, this run defense is not what it's been the last couple of years. And while they're still going to be good with Darius Leonard on the field, instead of top 5 good, we're more talking about like top 15, which you will see a really big difference in that. So then we talk about the pass defense. And this is where I'm especially worried about the Eberflus to Gus Bradley thing, because Matt Eberflus played one of the most disciplined, like, keep it together, keep everything in front of you, make tackles, everything zones that you see in football. And he did it in a really, really smart way, and it worked out really, really well. It, however, spread out a lot of responsibility and was able to mask issues he had with the personnel available to him. With Gus Bradley, like I said, that's not going to be the case, and I think where those areas were overshadowed before, they're really going to come to light now and create some issues. So first, the pass rush. Is it here? Not really. DeForest Buckner, I said I was going to talk about him. He is still a good pass rusher. People think of him, though, as if he's like Aaron Donald or Chris Jones, like that he's in that tier of pass rushers from the interior. That's absolutely not the case. He's right next to him. He's the tier below that, but that is a meaningful difference. And why is that a difference? It's because he just doesn't win as often as those guys do. Period. He doesn't get into the backfield cleanly as nearly as often as those guys do. He doesn't just collapse the pocket in the way that those guys do. And over the course of the season, that difference really adds up. Now, he's also amazing at batting down balls and stuff. I don't want to, like I said, he's a really, really good player. But he is not those guys, which makes it different, especially because there's no other real interior pass rush here. Grover Stewart is a significantly more run defender than anything else. And on the edges, they're fine. They're better than they have been the last couple of years. But they ain't nothing special. Yannick Ngakoue is an above-average rusher. He's a pure speed rusher. He does work against certain types of tackles pretty consistently, but he can be shut down, he can go cold, and he can be game planned out of a lot of things. Kwity Paye, as a first-round rookie last year, I did see things I liked, and there is a chance that he's really good. The problem here is that this team is depending on that. This team is depending on Kwity Paye stepping not just one step forward, but like 3 steps forward and becoming this A1 pass rusher from the edge, and the likelihood of that happening is effectively zero. And that's going to be a problem. So while overall it's not like there's no pass rush here, it is not nearly enough to consistently affect the quarterback the way that they probably need, because on the backside, this team is just kind of whatever. Stephon Gilmore is really good. He'll come in. I'm sure he'll play really well. He does fit the scheme and what Gus Bradley wants to do. He's not the issue I have. It's the rest of these guys. Isaiah Rodgers, I like in the scheme that he's been playing in, and he can move. He does have movement skills. He can shadow and stay with guys a little bit, but he is not necessarily a starter material, and he's also kind of really small. Brandon Faison, I do like as well as a depth piece. I like that signing a lot. I would take him on any team that I was rooting for. But again, as a starter, I would get concerned over the course of a season. And these safeties, man, they might be bad. Julian Blackman is fine, but he was one of those players that I think got really propped up by being asked to do just not nothing in the Eberflus system, but he was just kind of be like, hey, stay back there, be safe, be chill, and make plays on the ball if you can. And he did that well. I'm not going to say he's a bad player because he's not, but he's not like this big-time playmaker that's going to be on an island out there and execute incredibly well. In the other spot, I mean, Ronnie McLeod hasn't been good in 5 years, and he's hurt. And when he plays, he gives up big plays kind of all the time. Armani Watts is a fine depth rookie. And then the other one, I mean, Nick Cross, they have hopes for as I think a second rounder, but there's as a rookie, he's just a crapshoot basically, and he might just be bad. So you are talking about real issues potentially at this safety group, as well as being exposed more than they have been previously. So as a pass defense on the whole, I wouldn't be surprised. I would be surprised if they were bad for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't very good. And in the modern NFL, again, that can be a real issue. So then we move to the schedule. And what is this team worried about, right? This team is worried about basically any teams that are good, I think is the problem. And that sounds harsh. And like I said, I do think this team is okay, but you ask yourselves, how does this team beat good teams offensively, right? And it's by, again, you kind of have to run them over at the line of scrimmage, which I don't see this team being able to do very consistently with any of these teams. Maybe you can talk yourself into the Texans and Patriots current rosters and stuff like that, but it's unlikely, I would argue, and especially teams that have given them problems like the Jaguars, where they have a really stout defensive front, the Chiefs, Broncos, all that stuff is a problem, and once you get into the second half of the season, it gets even worse. And defensively, again, how do they win? And I think it's just by teams not being good enough to take advantage of their bad areas, which kind of limits you to the teams that you're going to consistently beat, right? And that's more or less the problem I have with this team overall. I don't think they are particularly bad. I think there's at least reasonable talent. They have some really high-end players. But as a whole, I think they will really, really struggle to actually win games against the good teams in the NFL. So, as a whole, the Colts, whatever. I think it's more or less likely to be a lost year, and that's nothing bad about Frank Reich or anything. It's just the roster they have as constructed. They're about one playmaker away from being actually good, though.